Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. Lydia Harrington never expected the scent of lilacs to stir a sense of dread in her. But as the breeze carried it across the open lawn of her bridal shower, mingling with laughter and soft music, she found herself shivering despite the warm coastal sun. Everything around her looked picture perfect. Rows of white chairs draped with lace, a handmade sign that read "From Miss to Mrs., and close friends scattered across picnic blankets with champagne in hand. It was the kind of afternoon people dreamed of, wholesome, celebratory, intimate. Yet, Lydia felt like a stranger at her own celebration. People spoke to her with glowing eyes and hopeful smiles, but their voices felt far away, muffled behind an invisible wall. A gnawing sense of imbalance sat in her chest, like something was misplaced, and she couldn't name it. Every time her phone buzzed in her hand, her eyes darted to the screen. No message. Not from Aaron. Not even a thumbs-up emoji. She told herself he was just busy, that men didn't care much for parties like these anyway. But excuses started sounding more like prayers. She hadn't seen him in 2 days. It wasn't unusual. They were finalizing the move to their new place, sorting through vendors and paperwork. Still, this silence felt different. Not loud, but hollow. As her best friend, Tara Whitmore, wrapped her arm around her shoulders and snapped another photo, Lydia forced a smile wide enough to fool the camera, if not herself. Tara looked effortlessly radiant, as always, sun-kissed curls bouncing as she laughed, her yellow dress catching the wind like it belonged in a fashion ad. She whispered in Lydia's ear, "You're glowing, babe. You look like you're already married." Lydia chuckled softly, but inside, her mind drifted elsewhere. She caught herself watching Tara longer than she meant to, not with suspicion, but with a quiet longing for certainty. Tara had been her rock through every mess life had thrown. They'd met during their first year at Milton College, and had stuck together like ivy ever since. When Lydia had food poisoning before her final exams, Tara nursed her like a mother hen. When Aaron proposed under the apple tree last spring, Tara was the first person she called. So why, Lydia wondered, did she now feel the urge to hold her phone tightly in her lap, as if something fragile inside it might break at any second? It was unlike her to let doubts take root. But today, even laughter sounded slightly off-key. People were clapping now, playing some silly bridal game with blindfolds and ribbons, but Lydia's ears tuned them out. Her fingers scrolled through her call log, no recent calls from Aaron. Not even a missed one. And that silence, though she told herself it was harmless, dripped with unspoken questions. The wind picked up, tugging playfully at the decorative balloons tied to the porch railings. Lydia excused herself to the restroom, but instead wandered inside the house, letting the sounds of celebration fade behind her. She stood by the kitchen sink, staring out the window, watching the shadows stretch across the backyard as late afternoon crept into early evening. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured a glass of water. It wasn't like Aaron to go this quiet. He was never overly expressive, but he wasn't absent either. He'd send short messages throughout the day, check in with how the planning was going, complain playfully about caterers and centerpieces. But for the past 24 hours, not a word. She told herself not to overthink it. Maybe he was just overwhelmed. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of fittings, family visits, and guest lists. Still, her instincts whispered louder than her reasoning. She pulled out her phone again, opened their chat, and reread his last message from 2 nights ago. "Can't wait to see you Saturday. Let me know if anything changes." That was it. A message so neutral it could have been written to a stranger. No "I love you," no humor, no warmth. Just polite, distant, and somehow, that chilled her more than anger ever could. She took a long sip from the glass, as if water could drown the questions crowding her mind. A few minutes later, as Lydia returned to the porch, she spotted her mother dancing with her younger cousin in the grass, her hair pinned up with the same silver clip she wore at Lydia's christening. That sight, so ordinary and gentle, should have calmed her. But instead, it made her feel more adrift, like watching a world she no longer belonged to. Her heart beat faster now, inexplicably, and her thoughts formed into something too solid to ignore. She had to see Aaron. Right now. She couldn't explain the urgency to herself, much less anyone else. It wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about drama. It was about knowing. Some part of her, a place too deep for logic, believed that she needed to see his face before the sun set. She leaned toward Tara, who was now busy helping stack gift boxes. "Hey, I think I'm going to slip out early," she said softly. Tara turned, frowning. "Already? But you haven't even opened the presents." Lydia smiled, and it felt like her lips were made of paper. "I just feel a little dizzy. I'll call you later." She hugged her quickly, too quickly, then walked away without waiting for Tara's reply. Her heels clicked on the pavement with a rhythm that quickened as she made it to her car. The sky above Elmswick had darkened slightly, not yet night but no longer day, like the hour itself wasn't sure where it belonged. And neither was she. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel. For the first time in her life, Lydia was chasing something she couldn't name, but she knew it lived just beyond the door of Aaron's apartment. She knew, without knowing how, that once she opened it, she would never be the same again. The drive to Aaron's apartment felt longer than usual, as though the roads had stretched overnight. Lydia kept her eyes fixed on the darkening horizon, her knuckles pale against the steering wheel. Her heart tapped a slow but growing rhythm in her chest, a warning bell muffled beneath layers of logic and doubt. She told herself she wasn't being paranoid, that she was simply seeking reassurance. But deep down, she knew this wasn't a visit made out of whimsy. The silence from Aaron hadn't just been absence. It had been a kind of quiet that felt deliberate, like a door being softly closed from the other side. The car's headlights flickered briefly as she turned onto Hollow Ridge Lane, a narrow road shaded by overgrown trees. It was the same street she'd visited dozens of times before. Yet tonight, everything looked different, still and shadowed, as though the world itself had paused to watch her next move. Her foot hovered over the brake as she neared the familiar building. The porch light was off. The curtains were drawn. Only a faint orange glow peeked through the bedroom window upstairs, flickering like a candle nearing its final breath. She parked but didn't step out right away. For a long moment, she sat there in the hush of her own thoughts, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. Her phone lay face down on the passenger seat, buzzing once, then again. She ignored it. The sky above was bruising into night, but Lydia barely noticed. Her mind was moving faster than her surroundings, unraveling memories, comparing timelines, measuring silences. By the time she opened the car door, the air had turned cool, wrapping around her like a second skin. She shut the door gently, careful not to make a sound, though she couldn't explain why. Her shoes whispered against the cracked pathway leading to Aaron's front porch. She had been here so many times, sometimes with takeout in hand, sometimes with laughter bubbling in her chest. But tonight, she approached like a stranger. The porch creaked as she stepped onto it, each board groaning softly beneath her weight. She reached for the door handle out of habit, half expecting it to be locked. But it wasn't. It gave way without resistance. The door eased open, revealing a dim hallway. No music, no television murmuring in the background. Just a faint warmth in the air, tinged with eucalyptus and something sweeter, vanilla maybe. She stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind her, the latch clicking like the punctuation mark to a sentence she hadn't meant to write. The house wasn't messy, but it didn't look lived in either. A jacket tossed over the arm of the couch, a half-drunk glass of water on the table. Shoes beside the stairs that she didn't recognize, soft, tan flats that didn't belong to her. Her breath caught, but she didn't let herself stop walking. One step, then another. Each footfall on the hardwood floor was like a heartbeat. The further she went, the more the silence seemed to grow, expanding until it filled every corner. As she reached the bottom of the staircase, she paused. Above her, soft thuds. Movement. A faint hum. Maybe a voice. She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand brushing the wooden rail like she needed it to keep from floating away. The staircase wasn't long, but tonight it felt endless. Her mind raced with questions she wasn't brave enough to ask out loud. What if he was sick? What if he had an emergency? What if? But the other what-ifs were louder now, breaking through the fabric of her rational thoughts. What if he wasn't alone? What if he hadn't been busy but rather occupied, with someone else? As she reached the landing, her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The hallway stretched before her, short and dimly lit. The door to the guest room was closed. The bathroom light was off. But the door to Aaron's bedroom, the room where they'd once dreamed about building a life, was half open. A soft yellow glow spilled into the hallway, hazy and warm. Steam curled out like a breath, clinging to the walls and painting the air with the scent of eucalyptus and lavender. Her hand hovered near the doorframe. She didn't knock. She didn't announce herself. She simply nudged the door open, inch by inch, until she could see inside. And that was when the world, her world, tilted. Tara was standing by the bed. Not seated. Not searching for something. Just standing, still composed as though she belonged there. Her hair was damp, coiled in soft waves that clung to her shoulders. She wore a robe. Aaron's robe. The same one Lydia had gifted him on their second anniversary. It hung loose on her frame, tied in a knot at the waist, revealing too much to be mistaken for comfort. Lydia's breath left her in one sudden gasp, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted around the room. A towel lay on the floor, still wet. A water bottle was uncapped on the nightstand. And then, the bathroom door creaked behind Tara. Aaron stepped out, his hair dripping, a towel wrapped low around his waist, and a stunned look splashed across his face like cold water. Their eyes locked. He froze. Tara turned slowly, catching Lydia's gaze with a look not of surprise, but guilt. Lydia didn't blink. Her mind didn't scream. It just shut down. Her feet moved before her thoughts did, carrying her backward, down the hall, down the stairs, past the flats by the door, past the quiet kitchen, out into the night. The air outside slapped her like a wake-up call. Still no tears came. Just a burning in her throat, and a silence louder than anything she'd ever heard in her life. The streetlights blurred as Lydia drove without direction, their golden glow bending through tears that refused to fall. Her eyes were dry, too dry for what she had just witnessed, as though her body hadn't yet caught up with her mind. The steering wheel felt foreign under her fingers, cold and stiff like an object pulled from another life. She didn't know where she was going, just away, anywhere that wasn't that apartment, that room, that air heavy with steam and betrayal. The engine hummed quietly, a dull reminder that the world was still moving, still breathing, even as something inside her had gone still. Elmswick's narrow roads twisted through the night like old secrets, and she let herself follow them, not caring whether they led her into the hills or back to the shoreline. Her phone rang twice, the screen lighting up with Aaron's name, then once with Tara's. She didn't answer either. Instead, she rolled down the window, letting the wind slap her face and whip her hair into tangles, as if nature itself was trying to shake her awake. But she wasn't sleeping. No, she was more awake than she had ever been, and that clarity felt cruel. It brought her thoughts into sharp focus. The robe on Tara, the look in Aaron's eyes, the towel on the floor, the half-open door. None of it needed to be explained, because nothing explained could undo the way it had made her feel. By the time she reached the edge of Elmswick's west side, the sky had darkened completely, and the road had emptied into silence. She drove past the old bakery with its crooked sign, past the rusting train tracks that hadn't seen a train in years, until she reached a dirt road that split off toward the trees. Her aunt's guest house waited there like an old secret, nestled among wild ivy and silent pines, far from town, far from faces. Lydia hadn't planned to come here, but her hands had turned the wheel instinctively, drawn to the one place that had always offered her retreat. She parked beneath the looming branches, the gravel crunching softly beneath her tires. The air here was cooler, heavier, soaked in the scent of damp leaves and thyme. She stepped out and closed the car door gently, as though afraid to wake something sleeping inside the trees. The guest house looked just as it always had, peeling paint on the shutters, a porch swing that creaked even when still, and the faint glimmer of a lantern in the window. Her aunt was away in the city for the week, which meant the house was hers alone. She unlocked the door and stepped into the dim, familiar space where the floorboards groaned and the walls breathed stories from decades past. She dropped her bag by the door, removed her shoes without thinking, and walked barefoot into the living room, her movements slow, automatic, as though she had stepped outside her own body and was watching herself from above. The first tear didn't come until she sat on the old couch, the one with the faded quilt draped over the back and the cushion that always sank too low. It came without sound, sliding down her cheek like it had been waiting at the edge all night. Then another, and another. She didn't sob. She didn't collapse. She just sat still, like a statue learning how to feel again. Her thoughts wandered through years of memories. How Tara had once held her hand after her father's funeral. How Aaron had danced with her in the kitchen when they had no music playing. How the three of them had once spent a weekend by the lake laughing about things they'd already started to forget. Every memory now felt poisoned, touched by something she hadn't seen before. Trust, she realized, isn't taken in a single blow. It erodes quietly, one moment at a time, until you look around and realize there's nothing left holding the pieces together. She wiped her face slowly and reached for the old journal tucked between the couch cushions. It wasn't hers. Her aunt kept it there, filled with poems, prayers, thoughts scribbled across yellowed pages. But tonight, Lydia needed to hold something that carried someone else's pain. She thumbed through the entries, reading random lines. Love is a silence that still hears everything. She closed the book. Outside, an owl called out from somewhere deep in the woods. The night pressed against the windows like it wanted in, but Lydia stayed curled on the couch, wrapped in the silence she now wore like a second skin. The next morning arrived without permission. Light poured through the cracks in the curtains, spilling over her tangled hair and swollen eyes. She hadn't slept, not really, just drifted in and out of numbness. The guest house smelled faintly of wood and distant rain. She rose slowly, her body stiff, her mind cluttered but hollow. The kettle took forever to boil, its whistle sounding like a cry she didn't have the strength to make. She sat at the kitchen table with a chipped mug of tea, staring out at the moss-covered fence beyond the window. Her phone lay beside her, silent now. No more missed calls. No more apologies waiting behind screens. She wondered if they'd given up or if they were just waiting, hoping she'd break the silence first. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, to hear their explanations and tear them apart. But another part, the part that had sat still in that room last night, watching the truth unfold without chaos, knew she wasn't ready to hear anything yet. She didn't want their version of what had happened. She wanted space to reclaim her own. Her mother called that afternoon, her voice gentle but confused. Lydia said she needed rest. Nothing more. She hadn't told her yet. She hadn't told anyone. Because how do you explain something that felt like a dream until it cracked you open? For now, she let the silence stretch. Let it become the shield she wrapped around herself while she figured out what, if anything, could be salvaged from the ashes. 2 days passed before Lydia heard the knock. It was late in the afternoon, the kind of day where the clouds hang too low and the air feels too still. She was seated by the window, curled up in a threadbare sweater, her thoughts lost somewhere between clarity and numbness. The knock came softly at first, barely loud enough to be noticed, like a question testing its welcome. When it sounded again, firmer, more hesitant, she didn't move. Her body stiffened, but she made no effort to rise. She already knew. Before her feet touched the floor, she recognized the rhythm of the knock, not demanding, not desperate, just familiar. The kind of knock someone uses when they've stood outside too long rehearsing how to begin. She opened the door and found Tara there, soaked from the rain that had begun an hour ago, hair limp, mascara streaked. She looked nothing like the version Lydia had seen in Aaron's robe. Now she looked undone, like something had caved in behind her eyes. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not angry, not yet. It was the kind of silence that holds 1,000 words no one dares to say first. Tara stood there with her arms crossed, not to shield herself but to keep from falling apart. Lydia stepped aside without invitation, and Tara entered the guest house like someone walking through memory, her eyes darting across furniture she had once helped Lydia move into place 2 summers ago. They didn't sit. They didn't exchange pleasantries. The distance between them felt jagged, lined with glass. Tara's voice came softly, almost trembling. "Please let me explain." Lydia didn't reply right away. Her breath came slow and measured, the kind of breath that one takes just to keep from breaking. She watched Tara carefully, unsure whether to listen or to walk away. Her heart was still heavy from the weight of that night, the way it had cleaved through her with such precision. But curiosity, or perhaps the raw need for clarity, kept her feet rooted. Tara swallowed hard and began. "It wasn't what it looked like. I know how that sounds. I know it's the worst sentence anyone could say after something like that. But please let me say this." Lydia folded her arms slowly, watching her friend's every movement. "Say it," she whispered, not because she wanted to hear it, but because she needed to. Tara took a long breath and stared at the floor, searching for a place to begin. "It happened a long time ago. Before you and Aaron. Before anything between you two even started. We were on that group trip. Remember the one to the cabin near Willow Ridge?" Lydia remembered. Barely. It had been one of those carefree weekends, full of card games and burnt marshmallows. Tara continued. "One night we were all drunk. Aaron and I kissed. Just once. It was stupid. It didn't mean anything. We never talked about it again. When you and he started dating, we both decided not to say anything because it felt pointless. It was a footnote we thought would only cause unnecessary damage." Lydia listened without blinking. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, not in rage, but in an effort to stay composed. Tara took another breath. "But lately it's been eating at me. With the wedding coming, with everything getting more real. I started thinking that maybe you deserved to know, no matter how far back it was. I went to Aaron's to tell him we needed to come clean before the wedding. That's the truth. She paused. Then you showed up, and everything went to hell. The words floated in the air like dust, unwilling to settle. Lydia stayed still, her face unreadable, but inside, the world tilted again, only slightly this time. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't forgiveness, but it was a shift. Something about the story rang true, not because she wanted it to, but because she recognized the way guilt had hollowed out Tara's voice. Still, something felt unfinished. Why the robe? Lydia asked, her voice barely audible. Tara let out a bitter laugh, not of humor, but of disbelief. I spilled coffee on myself. The mug slipped out of my hands while we were arguing. He told me to take the robe while he cleaned it up. I should have said no. I should have done 1,000 things differently. But I didn't. I swear to you, Lydia, nothing happened that night. I wasn't there to betray you. I was trying to be honest, too late maybe, but honest all the same. Silence swallowed them again. Lydia turned away for a moment, her eyes tracing the raindrops that slid down the window pane. She thought of all the years they'd known each other, how Tara had been at every birthday, how they'd slept on each other's floors during heartbreaks, how they had once promised to be in each other's weddings. It hurt in ways she didn't have language for. The betrayal wasn't just about Aaron. It was about trust misplaced. Tara's presence in that room hadn't just cracked her engagement, it had fractured her past. And now, standing in the house where she came to heal, that fracture echoed through every memory they once shared. She didn't ask Tara to leave, but she didn't ask her to stay either. Eventually, Tara walked toward the door, her steps uncertain. Before she reached it, Lydia spoke, her voice hollow but steady. You made a decision not to tell me. You and Aaron. You both decided what I could handle. That wasn't your right. Tara stopped in her tracks but didn't turn around. I know, she said, and those 2 words held more truth than any apology could. The door opened slowly, letting in a gust of cold air that blew past Lydia like a ghost. When it closed again, the room was still. Lydia stood there, alone once more, but this time it felt different. The silence had shape now. It had edges. It wasn't just absence, it was space. Space she needed to think, to feel, to decide. The pain hadn't lessened, but something had shifted. Truth, however late, had a way of rearranging the rubble. She sat back down on the couch, her eyes focused on the spot where Tara had stood. It would take time, more time than anyone could measure, to understand what came next. But for the first time in days, Lydia wasn't drowning. She was still bleeding, yes, but she could feel the ground under her feet. The storm outside had softened into a mist, and in the quiet, she found something close to breath again. The sun appeared the next morning without ceremony, filtering through the gauzy curtains in soft beams that rested lightly on Lydia's face. She opened her eyes slowly, not jolted from sleep, but gently nudged by the growing light. The stillness of the room was familiar now, a quiet companion she had come to accept. Her body moved reluctantly, each step to the kitchen more of a thought than an action. The kettle on the stove hissed to life, the sound barely louder than her heartbeat. She wasn't sure what day it was anymore. The hours had folded into each other like worn linens, indistinguishable in their wear and weight. But something about the way the morning felt, its stillness, its clarity, told her it wouldn't remain quiet for long. She sipped her tea slowly, the taste of chamomile dull on her tongue, and stared at the phone she had left untouched on the counter. She hadn't deleted Aaron's number. She hadn't blocked him. But she also hadn't answered. For days now, her silence had said everything. Still, as she sat at the table, her fingers hovered over the screen. And before she could second-guess herself, she opened the message he'd sent 3 days ago. It was short. Just 6 words. I don't know where to start. Nothing more. No defense. No denial. Just a man fumbling in the wreckage of something he broke with his own hands. She read it twice, then set the phone down again. Her tea had gone cold, but she drank it anyway. Maybe today was the day to speak. Or maybe it was simply the day to listen. When she arrived at the dock that evening, the one facing the edge of Belmere Lake, the sky was already shifting to dusky purples and muted oranges. The lake had always been a place for breath, a quiet stretch of water that seemed to listen more than it reflected. She parked a few feet away from where the old wooden path began and stepped out, feeling the chill of the wind wrap around her like a loose scarf. The boards creaked beneath her shoes as she walked slowly to the edge. Aaron was already there. He didn't turn when he heard her steps. He just stood, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the water like it held the answer to a question he didn't know how to ask. She stopped a few feet behind him, saying nothing. For a moment, they let the silence stretch long between them, not in hostility but in shared exhaustion. Eventually he turned. His face was worn in ways she hadn't seen before. The stubble along his jaw, the lines around his eyes. He looked like someone who'd stopped sleeping properly. There was no trace of confidence in his stance, no posturing. Just quiet regret. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice low. She nodded, unsure if she meant it. Her arms crossed loosely over her chest, more to contain her thoughts than for warmth. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, eyes not leaving his. He looked down at the weathered planks beneath their feet. "Because I didn't know how to explain something that I wanted to forget. And then when you and I got serious, it just felt easier to leave it buried." He looked up again. "I know how that sounds. I was wrong." His words didn't soothe her. But he hadn't come to soothe. That much was clear. Lydia stepped a little closer, enough to feel the tension in the space between them. "And what about now? Did it mean anything to you?" Her question didn't crack. It came out strong, shaped by days of rehearsal in her mind. Aaron's mouth twitched, like he'd expected it. "It didn't. Not back then. But I think we both knew that not saying anything was going to catch up with us." He paused, letting the wind interrupt them for a few moments before continuing. "I didn't kiss her again. I didn't touch her. But when she came over that night and brought it all up again, I didn't stop her either. Not right away. I should have told her to leave. I should have told you everything years ago. But I was too afraid of losing what we had." Lydia tilted her head slightly. "So instead, you waited until you had nothing left to lose?" The words didn't sting when she said them. They landed with calm finality, like puzzle pieces falling into place. Aaron didn't answer that. He just looked out at the water again, his eyes glinting in the dying light. "I didn't deserve you," he said, more to himself than to her. For a moment, she considered arguing with that. But she didn't. Because maybe, just maybe, the truth had finally caught up to them both. They sat on the edge of the dock in silence for what felt like hours, knees drawn up, the last light disappearing into the lake. Lydia's thoughts moved like the water before them, slow, deliberate, unhurried. There was nothing left to confront. She had seen what she needed to see, heard what needed to be heard. She didn't ask if he still loved her. She didn't want to know. Some questions weren't meant to be answered in words. When she stood to leave, Aaron stood too, but didn't follow. He just watched as she walked back toward her car, not saying goodbye, not asking for another chance. And for once, Lydia didn't feel like she owed anything. The weight on her chest hadn't vanished, but it had shifted, become something she could carry without breaking. As she drove back to the guest house, the trees lining the road blurred past like quiet witnesses. She thought of Tara's eyes when she had stood in the doorway. She thought of the robe, the towel, the kiss from years ago, and she thought of all the quiet ways people choose to betray, not with violence, but with decisions born out of fear and selfish comfort. She didn't cry on the way home. She didn't scream or throw anything. Instead, she turned on the radio to a station filled with nothing but soft piano music and let the night unfold around her. She was beginning to understand that closure doesn't always arrive with grand declarations. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wrapped in a final conversation under a purple sky, leaving you with nothing but your own breath and the sound of footsteps fading behind you. The days that followed moved with the gentleness of fog. Lydia existed in a quiet rhythm, rising early, making tea she often forgot to drink, sitting by the porch of the guest house with her notebook open and mostly blank. Her mind had become a quieter place, though not yet peaceful. Thoughts still passed through her like echoes, sharp memories dulled only by repetition. She didn't speak to Tara again, not out of bitterness, but because she no longer needed more explanations. There was a certain freedom that came from seeing everything laid bare, the soft kind of relief that arrives when the lies are finally gone, even if the truth leaves a mess behind. She spent most of her time outside, watching the way the wind moved through the tall grass, or how the sunlight filtered through the pine branches like gold through stained glass. Nature, at least, didn't pretend. It changed openly, without apology. And in its quiet honesty, she found something that felt like alignment. She started writing letters to herself, short, unsure, scribbled lines about the woman she thought she was and the woman she might now be. She didn't share them. They weren't meant for anyone else. They were like threads, helping her stitch the edges of her unraveling back together, one slow word at a time. And slowly, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in weeks, stillness without pain. One morning, she visited the bridal shop alone. The dress was still there, wrapped in its ivory sheath, untouched since her final fitting. The woman behind the counter hesitated when she saw her, as if unsure how to smile. Lydia offered one first, gentle but steady. I came to pick it up, she said. The woman's brows furrowed slightly, then softened with understanding. Of course. We'll get it packed for you. While they retrieved the dress, Lydia walked around the showroom slowly. She touched the lace of a stranger's gown on display, studied the veil hanging beside it. These things no longer held the same meaning, but they weren't poisoned either. They were just pieces of a story that had taken another turn. When her dress was brought out, she didn't cry. She simply looked at it for a long moment, the way one might look at a photograph of someone they used to love, fondly, but without longing. She thanked the staff and carried the dress out herself, folding it gently into the back seat of her car. She didn't know what she'd do with it. Maybe she'd donate it. Maybe she'd keep it for reasons she couldn't yet name. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd claimed it. Her decision, her closure. As she drove back through town, she passed the church where the ceremony had been scheduled. The bells didn't ring. The courtyard was empty. But the building still stood quietly like it always had, unmoved by the plans that had once surrounded it. In that stillness, Lydia felt something close to forgiveness, not of others, but of herself. A week later, she returned to her apartment. The one she and Aaron had signed together before everything fell apart. She wasn't sure what she would find, if he had moved out already, if he had left her things untouched, if he had written her a final letter. But when she unlocked the door, the place greeted her like a room caught in limbo. Half empty. Familiar but off-center. The kitchen counter still held the ceramic bowl they had picked out together from the market in Lindenbrook. Her favorite blanket lay folded on the armrest of the couch. And on the hallway table, beneath the mirror they'd argued over hanging too high, was a note in Aaron's handwriting. Just a single page, no envelope. It wasn't poetic. It didn't ask her to reconsider. It simply said, I'm sorry. I know what I broke. I'll carry that. I hope you find what brings you peace, even if it was never going to be me. She read it once and didn't read it again. The apology didn't erase what had happened, but it didn't need to. She wasn't looking for resolution in his words. She was looking for space to begin again. She spent the afternoon packing up what was hers. Not hurriedly, not angrily, just carefully, piece by piece. She took down framed photos, rolled up paintings, folded clothes into bags. Each item she touched came with a memory, but none had the power to undo her. She was past that now. She locked the apartment behind her as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. There was no one waiting at the curb, and she didn't need anyone to be. Her journey, whatever shape it would take next, had begun long before this ending. On her last evening in Elmswick, Lydia stood alone at the edge of the lake again. The air was cooler now, and the leaves had begun to change, amber and deep gold. She wore a thick sweater, boots caked with soil, hair pulled back in a loose braid. There was no script left to follow, no map for what came next. And for the first time, that didn't frighten her. She closed her eyes and inhaled the sharp scent of pine and water, letting it settle deep in her lungs. The world was still spinning, slow and steady, just as it always had. Heartbreak had come and passed like a wave, rough, unrelenting, but not endless. She had loved, she had trusted, and she had lost. But she had also survived. And in that survival, she discovered something unshakable. Her own voice, quiet but unbroken. As the light began to fade and the first stars blinked through the twilight, she turned away from the lake and walked back toward the road. There would be new places, new mornings, new stories that wouldn't need to begin with betrayal. She wasn't rushing toward them. She would take her time, because now time belonged to her. Not borrowed, not shared, not bound by promises made on someone else's terms. Just hers. And in that slow, steady walk beneath the wide-open sky, Lydia Harrington did not look back. Sometimes the deepest pain doesn't come from strangers, but from the ones we once trusted with our hearts. But even in betrayal, there is clarity. Even in heartbreak, there is growth. Learn to trust your instincts, to value your peace over forced closeness, and to walk away when love stops looking like love. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering who you are beyond what broke you. Don't be afraid to choose yourself, even when it means starting over. May your heart never be a resting place for deceit. May every false love be removed before it takes root too deep. May God protect you from those who smile with you in daylight, but betray you in the shadows. May your soul find peace even after pain, and may your spirit never grow tired of starting anew. May the doors that lead to heartbreak stay shut, and the ones that lead to true joy swing wide open. May your discernment be sharp, your healing be whole, and your next chapter be written with truth, trust, and quiet happiness. In your waiting, may you never settle. In your walking away, may you never feel alone. And in your rebuilding, may everything you lost be returned in better form. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.